Louise Shaner and Wendy Edelbergs. Their standard Keynesian counterfactual forecasting analysis. It is truly useful. Under its assumptions, Biden's $1.9 trillion reconciliation bill, even though it is not well targeted as a fiscal stimulus, manages to push the economy up and significantly over potential output in their central case. And as I said, I tend to think that their central case is pessimistic with respect to output. I tend to think that more of the $3 trillion extra wealth accumulation is going to be spent than they do in their baseline. Indeed, Biden's $1.9 trillion reconciliation bill is not well targeted as a fiscal stimulus. It is aimed at relief and support, as well as stimulus. Doing it through reconciliation and doing it in such a way as to hold all 50 Democratic senators in support, those impose considerable constraints on the form that it can take, and as optimal policy, it fails. If you want to think of it as a stimulus, I should think of it as more like $700 billion rather than $1.9 trillion. And as politics is the art of the possible, it succeeds. And as boosting an economy that may well need boosting, it seems effective. By contrast, the Republican bill is too small, unless you accept CBO's view of what potential output is, and unless you in addition hold on to the belief that there should be no recoupment of output gaps, that potential output is a ceiling you should never reach as opposed to an average you should aim to fluctuate around. And if you don't understand that we should right now be buying insurance. It is a mistake to conceptualize the problem of policy design here as one of producing a policy that is forecast, in the central case, either to get back to potential quickly, or to overshoot potential and then return in such a way as to balance out the demand-side component of the coronavirus's plagues depression of economic activity before potential. Instead, optimal policy design at this point needs to deal with uncertainties, asymmetries, and option value. And all discussion needs to start from the premise that this is quite likely to be going to be the only substantial bite at the apple. It might be possible to provide a further substantial fiscal boost to the economy at some time in the future if it is needed, but it might well not be politically possible. And it would be massively imprudent to plan on and expect that it would be politically possible to do so. And it would be massively idiotic to ignore the enormous option value created in this situation by the fact that the Federal Reserve can and will move swiftly to make sure that we do not get an unfortunate and undesirable inflationary spiral, but can do little by itself to cure a depression once the Federal Reserve has lowered its short-term safe interest rates all the way to the floor. What that means is that we need to make the chance that we will wish in the future that we had done more today very low. But you may say, how about the chance that we will wish in the future that we had done less today? Why do we not need to worry about that? Well, we do need to worry about that if we do not trust the Federal Reserve to take appropriate steps to control inflation, should such steps become necessary. But let me postpone the question of whether we trust the Federal Reserve to the future, except to note that right now I do trust the Federal Reserve. In order to calculate what we should do in order to have a low probability of wishing in the future that we had done more, we need to push our judgments to the edge of significant probability in three respects. First, we need to act as though we are highly optimistic as to the pace of potential output growth. We do not want, after the fact, to look back and say, gee, we really underestimated potential output growth. Second, we need not to be optimistic about the multiplier in this case. We need to suppose that that portion of the reconciliation bill money that is going to those who normally have a low marginal propensity to consume, that will not materially boost the pile of savings that are burning a hole through their pockets and that they will spend quickly. It is thus prudent to suppose that only those income boosts that hit the truly liquidity constrained will be spent. And as I said, that's why we should think of this as $700 billion of fiscal stimulus and $1.12 trillion of relief and support. But shouldn't we then take steps to craft the bill more carefully? If we are giving money away to people who are not liquidity constrained for no good macroeconomic purpose, shouldn't we halt those expenditures and so avoid such a great increase in the national debt? If interest rates were positive, the answer to that question would be yes. But since interest rates are not positive, and since we want to have this bill having its impact on the economy over the summer, it seems best to postpone issues of debt management and income redistribution and so forth into the future, and right now focus on relief, support, and stimulus. But shouldn't we be spending much more of the money on investment in America? Yes, we should. And if you can show up with 10 Republican senators willing to make that a priority and to vote for a $1.9 trillion stimulus bill so crafted, well, go ahead, that's what we should do, but there are no such Republican senators. And in addition, we need to presume that Americans understand that the world is now a much riskier place than we thought it was a year and a half ago. So we need to presume that increases in wealth to income ratios, even among rich households, that they reflect the changing definition of prudence, rather than sums that are going to be rapidly spent down as a result of impatience. And all of these, I think, militate strongly in support of the Biden package, even though it shows a considerable excess of spending above what CBO regards as an optimistic estimate of full employment. Or militate strongly in support of the Biden package, as long as we can trust the Federal Reserve to handle problems that emerge if the policy does what is indeed supposed to do if it boosts production and employment up above potential output and beyond full employment, or would do so in the absence of aggressive monetary policy offset. And can we trust the Federal Reserve? Jay Powell, after all, thinks that he made a big mistake in the middle of the 2010s, and he will not make his temper tantrum mistake again. He and his Open Market Committee will not prematurely withdraw monetary stimulus before they see the whites of rising inflation's eyes, and won't that be too late to control an inflationary spiral? I think it does not. I think Powell will wait until the moment, but that does not mean he will hesitate to withdraw monetary stimulus and impose monetary austerity if we do reach a situation in which inflation control is rightly the highest priority of the Federal Reserve. Jay Powell, if faced with a return of the 1970s, is highly, highly unlikely to turn into the equivalent of an Arthur Burns or a G. William Miller. Back then they, either out of a sense of loyalty to political patrons or out of fear of losing the Federal Reserve's independence through policies Congress would judge as excessively austere, or by misjudging the situation, decided to wait and see and hope the situation would improve by itself on inflation, and it did not, and the U.S. economy got into a big mess. Now, it could happen. Never say never. But the odds of that seem to be extremely low. First, the more we look at how industrial economies behave, the more it looks as though the inertial inflation of the 1970s, that was a one-off, produced by a unique confluence of a central bank that did not take its price stability mission seriously, an economic structure in which major moves in the price of a single crucial commodity, oil, were both of powerful fundamental importance and served as a signal on which market participants could condition their own inflation expectations. No key fundamental role of oil, no conditioning of market expectations of inflation on the oil price, no absence of trust in central banks, then no inflation of the 1970s. And this is an argument that Robert Gordon and my co-author Robert Barsky have been pursuing for a generation. I, in the past, tended to dismiss them. More evidence and more looking at what oil price does to the economy and more digging deep into how little oil was actually traded at the spot price in the 1970s and thereafter. That's moved me away from what was the consensus of Keynesian macroeconomists about the inertial character of inflation and the role of overheating in generating the inflation of the 1970s. And I'm pleased, or not pleased, but at least reassured, to see that Paul Krugman, in his Krugman Today of Thursday, February 4th, yes, February 4th, of Thursday, February 4th, and also on his brand new Substack, is finding himself moving in the same direction. Are we changing our minds because we find it politically convenient? I really do not think so. I think it's the balance of the evidence. But I will continue to scrutinize my beliefs as stringently as I can. At the moment, however, I am highly, highly confident that Jerome Powell will neither make the Greenspan mistake of viewing unregulated bubble finance with benign neglect, the Bernanke mistake of premature normalization come hell or high water, or the Burns-Miller mistakes. He will make his own mistakes, but we do not know what those will be, and so we cannot plan for him. And we should not fear him making Burns-Miller mistakes in the future, and have that fear lead us into avoiding appropriate fiscal policy now out of fear of what may lie in the shadows ahead. So yes, I do think that the Biden reconciliation bill for relief, support, and stimulus is highly appropriate at this moment and deserves to pass. I do think it will do a lot of good in easing America's recovery. At this point, it's traditional to say something about sausage and legislation, and again, art of the possible, and so on and so forth, and to apologize for the deficiencies of the plan. But I do not think we really need to say that. This does look to me like as much of a technocratic triumph as one is likely to have in this fallen sublunary sphere, in this sewer of Romulus in which we live and work. And I'm impressed with the policy design and with the marshalling of the political coalition. Or at least I'm impressed about the Democrats. I am not so impressed with the Republicans. These issues of relief, support, and stimulus to get the America working again, those do not seem to me to be partisan issues. I could understand if the right wing of the Republican Party, with its ideological blinders and its deficiencies and its inability to avoid thinking of that optimal policy is very different when a Democrat than when a Republican is president, and it's kind of we only worry about the deficit and the debt when a Democrat is in the White House. I would be not disappointed and not surprised, but scornful if they were to show up with a $600 billion proposal. I would say, yes, they're bad, this is bad, but this is par for the course. They are what they are. I am embarrassed for the moderate, non-fantasy-based wing of the Republican Party when this is what it brings to the potluck. I think they know better and ought to do better. I'm Brad DeLong, and this is the DeLongTODAY briefing. Thank you very much for watching.